the Euphrates River. People want to know, they've seen. Is it drying up? The Bible talks about this in Revelation chapter 16.
A fallen angel was found on a cave under the Euphrates River, and the news is spreading like wildfire. Its ancient waters are receding, and they're uncovering ruins that should have stayed buried. And something else. Stay with us, because a horrible prophecy is taking place right in front of our eyes, and there's no way out of it. The river that should not whisper. The Euphrates River was once called the cradle of civilization. It was the lifeblood of Mesopotamia, the river from Eden, the waterway of kingdoms, prophets, and empires. It stretched like a silver serpent through the lands of modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, untamed, ancient, and always moving. But not anymore. Before we delve into this, it's clear that the Euphrates hasn't just dried. It's uncovered something far older than empires, and this won't be the only thing beneath the river that will shake you to your core. Now, something else was moving beneath it. As the Euphrates dries, a slow vanishing trick blamed on dams, drought, and war. What lies underneath is no longer legend. It is waking up. First, the water levels dropped. Then came the ruins. Then the sounds. People living near the newly exposed riverbed started hearing things. Not birds, not echoes. Something darker, something older. Something that sounded like whispers, low and deep, like chants, like moans, like sorrow rising from the soil. Some said it was the wind. Others said it was a warning. Then came the cave. A cluster of shepherds found it first, an opening, jagged and wide, on a shelf of crumbling stone where the water once ran thick and high. The entrance had been hidden for centuries, maybe longer. Its face was blackened, not by fire, but by time itself. It did not look like it belonged here, or anywhere on Earth. Word spread quickly. Soon, archaeologists and drone teams descended on the region. Not just local scientists, but international specialists, military advisors, and even a private religious organization that refused to share its name. The Turkish government sealed the area with a temporary perimeter. No-fly zones were declared. Something was happening, and no one wanted it public. At least not yet. Scans of the cave showed strange symmetry inside. Not natural curves, not rough angles, but patterns, shapes, symbols. The team drilled just enough to open the passage. What they found was not a series of caverns. It was a chamber. The walls were lined with carvings, deep gouges in the rock that formed a spiral leading downward. The floor was dry, but the air was not. It hung thick with humidity, like something was still breathing inside. At the center of the first chamber was a pool, still, black, deeper than it looked. One drone that skimmed the surface shut down instantly, its internal systems fried. Another was lowered on a tether. It recorded only 20 seconds of footage before losing contact. In that brief moment, the screen showed something large moving just under the surface. A shape, a ripple, something that was watching. Then came the bones. Not far from the pool's edge, buried in the soft silt, were several enormous skeletal remains. Not fossils, not ancient stones, actual bones. They were thick, curved, and reptilian. Some were the size of a man's torso. And the skull, half-jawed and twisted, bore features that were neither crocodile nor lizard. It had horns, eye sockets wider than a human face, and rows of teeth curved backward like hooks. This creature should not exist. It didn't match any known species from this region, or from this planet. One theory surfaced quickly: a giant crocodile. But there was a problem. Crocodiles had never been native to this region, especially not of this scale. The Euphrates had no such history, and this skeleton was more than 20 feet long. It had 4 massive claws, and worst of all, the bone was fresh. Its decay rate suggested death within the last 100 years. That was impossible, unless it had never died at all, unless it had been trapped in that cave, sleeping, watching, guarding. The scientists catalogued the remains. Samples were taken, DNA tests ordered. But before the results returned, a second discovery changed everything. Behind the skeleton, partially submerged in a narrow alcove, was a carved pedestal. On it, a stone slab no wider than a dinner table, and atop that slab, an altar, blackened by fire, chipped, ancient, covered in dust that turned red when brushed away. The altar had engravings, not language, not writing, but symbols. One resembled a winged creature, not quite man, not quite bird. Another showed rivers flowing from a mouth with teeth. And the third, it was a circle. Inside it, 4 shapes chained at the edges. 4 winged beings. The team froze. One of the researchers, a former seminary student turned epigrapher, pulled out an old reference guide. Within minutes, he had an answer. The symbols matched descriptions from ancient scrolls and the book of Revelation. They weren't just drawings, they were prophecy. Release the 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates. That verse had always been dismissed as metaphor, a warning, a story, but now carved into stone beneath the very river mentioned by name. This wasn't just a coincidence. Jesus warned his disciples about signs, plagues, wars, and whispers in the earth. But the book of Revelation spoke more directly. The 4 angels would be loosed, bringing judgment and death to 1/3 of humanity. And now the cave was open. What had been bound was now exposed. But the cave wasn't done. Further inside, past the altar, was a narrow corridor. At the end, a door, stone, sealed, covered in ash, no hinges, no key. Just a single handprint burned into its surface, as if someone had touched it once, with a hand not made of flesh. The air around the door crackled. Static. Disruption. Phones failed. Watches stopped. And in the silence, something echoed from the depths behind the door. Not a voice, not a growl, but something worse. A heartbeat, slow, measured, alive. The team stepped back. Some prayed, others argued to leave. But one thing was now certain. Something had been locked away under the Euphrates, and it was waking up. The cave that should have stayed sealed. The door at the end of the corridor wasn't just a barrier. It was a warning. The stone was ancient, but it wasn't cracked like the surrounding walls. It was smooth, untouched by erosion, as if something beyond time had preserved it. The burned handprint at its center wasn't human-sized. It was larger, thicker, the fingers longer than any man's. Whatever had touched this door was not of this world. The researchers debated for hours. Some argued to leave it alone, to reseal the cave and cover the entrance with rock and soil. Others believed they were standing on the edge of the greatest discovery in human history. They believed history was unfolding at their feet. Finally, the choice was made. The team would proceed. Using sonic drills and low-vibration cutters, they began to weaken the edges of the stone slab. It took 2 days. During that time, strange things happened. Radios picked up voices in languages no one recognized. Temperatures fluctuated wildly, cold enough to see your breath one moment, hot enough to sweat the next. Worst of all were the dreams. Every night, members of the team reported vivid nightmares. Some saw oceans boiling. Others saw skies filled with blood-red clouds. One man dreamed of creatures with wings and burning eyes, circling over cities, tearing down towers made of glass and steel. Another woman dreamed she stood at the riverbank, watching the waters retreat into blackness. And from the exposed mud came thousands of hands, clawing their way to the surface. They dismissed it as stress, as fear, but deep down, they knew it was more. Finally, the stone door fell. It didn't crash, it didn't shatter, it simply slid inward, silently, as if welcoming them. Beyond the threshold was darkness. Not just absence of light, but a blackness that seemed to pull the very warmth from their bones. They turned on their lights. What they saw defied reason. The chamber was massive, bigger than any they had mapped so far. The ceiling stretched into darkness. The walls were covered in carvings, spirals, wings, rivers, and strange hybrid creatures that were neither animal nor human. At the centre of the room was a pit, round, deep, covered with a metal grate that looked impossibly ancient, yet still gleamed under the flashlight beams. And hanging above that pit was a chain. The chain was thick, thicker than a man's leg, made of a black metal that didn't match anything on the periodic table. It stretched down into the pit, taut, as if holding something beneath the earth itself. Around the pit were 4 pedestals. On each pedestal, a statue. The statues were monstrous. Each one depicted a winged being, bound by chains, their faces twisted in agony. Their wings were torn. Their hands reached upward in silent screams. And at the base of each statue was a name, written not in English, not in Greek, but in ancient Aramaic, the language Jesus himself spoke. The names translated to Abaddon, Apollyon, Shammazai, Azazel, names that had haunted scripture and ancient texts for millennia, names tied to destruction, rebellion, and ruin. The researchers stood frozen. This wasn't just a burial site. It was a prison built under the Euphrates River, the very river the book of Revelation warned about. A prison for fallen angels, locked away until the appointed time. And now the seals were broken. At first, they did nothing, just recorded, photographed, measured. But within hours, the atmosphere changed. The ground trembled, small rhythmic quakes, as if something massive was shifting deep below. The air grew heavy. Breathing became harder. Some of the team fell ill, nausea, headaches, dizziness. Others heard whispers in their ears, words they couldn't understand but that filled them with terror. And still, the chain over the pit stayed taut, until midnight. At the exact moment the clock struck midnight, the chain twitched, only once. A shudder like a massive heartbeat underground. The researchers ran for the surface. They set up remote cameras, sealed the chamber as best they could. Some wanted to fill the entire cave system with concrete. Others insisted they document more before making any moves. While they argued, something else happened. The water levels of the Euphrates dropped even faster. What had been slow receding turned into sudden retreat, revealing more ruins, more caves, more cracks in the earth. It was as if the river itself was pulling away from something, from the prison, from what was waking up. Meanwhile, in villages miles downstream, people reported strange lights in the sky. Red and white orbs danced along the riverbanks at night. Livestock disappeared. Fishermen spoke of seeing massive shadows move just under the water's surface, though the river was only knee-deep. Churches filled. Mosques overflowed. People prayed. They didn't know the full story yet, but they knew something was wrong. Back at the cave, the team received the DNA results from the skeletal remains they had recovered near the Black Pool. The samples contained sequences not found in any catalogued species on Earth. Not reptilian, not mammalian, not amphibian. Something else. And buried within the sequences were fragments that closely resembled human DNA, but twisted, corrupted, hybrid. The implications were chilling. Was this the bloodline of the Nephilim? The offspring of fallen angels and humans described in Genesis? Was the creature they found a guardian, a jailer, or a leftover from a time before time itself? The evidence pointed to something terrifying. The Euphrates River had hidden more than just ruins. It had hidden an ancient war, a war that wasn't over. And as the river bled dry, the seals crumbled and the prison doors creaked open, the world above remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath their feet. But not for long, because the next tremor was coming, and with it, something that would not be bound much longer. The awakening beneath the river. The tremor that followed was not natural. Seismologists stationed miles away recorded it as a shallow quake centered directly under the exposed cave system. But it was not the magnitude that terrified them. It was the pattern. The tremor pulsed like a heartbeat. 2 beats. Pause. 2 beats. Pause. Exactly every 33 seconds, something deep underground was stirring. Not shifting rocks, not grinding fault lines. Something alive. At the site, the once stable ground began to buckle. Cracks split open across the dusty riverbed, forming jagged scars that wept steam. The air smelled like sulphur and iron. Some said it smelled like blood. The team, against every instinct of survival, stayed. They wanted answers. They got something else. The remote cameras positioned inside the cave caught it first. At 3:26 in the morning, the chain over the pit snapped, not with a clang, not with a crash, with a whisper. The links of blackened metal did not shatter. They unravelled, turning into fine dust that drifted upward, as if called by something unseen. The grate over the pit shifted, groaned, and then lifted just an inch before falling back into place. But that was enough. A foul wind burst from the pit. Not cold, not hot. Something worse. It carried with it the smell of ancient decay and something else. A scent no one could place, like burnt feathers soaked in oil. The statues around the pit shuddered. Their chains, once so solid, showed cracks. The carved wings on their backs seemed to ripple, as if remembering a time when they were flesh, not stone. Above ground, animals fled the region in droves. Birds vanished from the sky. Night predators howled as if mourning. Even insects abandoned their nests. Whatever had been contained beneath the Euphrates was no longer sleeping. It was rising. Meanwhile, the team's data feed showed something even more unsettling. Thermal imaging picked up 4 distinct heat signatures around the pit, each one matching the placement of the statues. But these were not residual heat traces from rock or trapped gases. They were moving, slow at first, then faster, rotating around the pit in perfect formation, as if trapped in an invisible orbit. The researcher monitoring the feed whispered the word no one wanted to say, sentient. They were watching, waiting, and somehow choosing. Above the river, the atmosphere changed again. Clouds gathered in unnatural shapes, long spirals twisting downward like fingers reaching for the earth. Lightning flickered, but without thunder. Instead, low-frequency hums rolled across the landscape, vibrating deep inside the chest of anyone who listened too long. Satellite images captured a strange phenomenon directly over the site, a swirling anomaly, like a hurricane's eye, but stationary. And at the center of it, an opening, a tear, as if the sky itself was splitting. In ancient texts, including the apocalyptic visions of Ezekiel and Revelation, it was said the heavens would roll back like a scroll. When divine judgment approached, this looked frighteningly similar. Back at the site, equipment began to fail. Batteries drained in minutes. Computers flickered and shut down. Cameras froze on static images, faint outlines of shapes moving through the misty darkness. Not human, not animal, something in between. One member of the team, a hardened veteran of archaeological digs in war-torn regions, broke down completely. He described seeing 4 figures, winged, enormous, cloaked in mist, standing around the pit, their heads bowed, their hands chained. But their chains were cracking. He fled the site that night and was never seen again. The remaining team, desperate for understanding, turned to the ancient altar discovered earlier, the one bearing the symbols of the 4 chained beings. Under ultraviolet light, new details emerged. The altar's surface was covered not just in carvings, but in inscriptions. Words written so finely they were invisible to the naked eye. Scholars hastily translated what they could. The message was chilling. Bound by water, sealed by blood, guarded by the covenant of stone. When the river flees and the blood moon cries, they shall rise for one final reckoning. bound by water, sealed by blood, guarded by the covenant of stone. Every part of that prophecy had now been broken. The river was drying. The stones were cracked. The blood moon had appeared weeks earlier, casting an eerie red glow over the Middle East. The signs were not coming. They were here. The Euphrates, once the cradle of humanity, was becoming the graveyard of prophecy. Yet the world above continued its madness. Global tensions escalated, nations bristled with anger, economies teetered, wars brewed like storms waiting to crash. And somewhere under the exposed bed of the Euphrates, something ancient flexed its broken wings. The book of Revelation had warned of this. Jesus had warned of signs in the sun, the moon and the stars, of roaring seas, of men's hearts failing them for fear of what was coming upon the world. Now it was not fear, it was certainty. In one final act of desperation, the team tried to reseal the chamber. They brought explosives, concrete, steel. They blasted the main passage, collapsed the side corridors, buried the entrance under tons of rock. But when they checked the thermal scans afterward, the heat signatures were still there, moving, closer to the surface. Nothing would stop what had been set in motion. And deep beneath the crumbling ruins of the Euphrates, where chains once held the unholy captive, a sound was heard. It was not a growl, it was not a scream, it was laughter, low, mocking. And it promised only one thing. The end was closer than anyone dared believe. The seals are broken. News of the Euphrates anomaly could not stay hidden for long. Despite the military roadblocks, the blacked-out satellite images, and the rushed scientific denials, whispers began to spread. Smuggled footage, grainy radio transmissions, frantic emails from researchers who had fled the site. The world's eyes turned toward the Euphrates. But by then, it was too late. The four had already begun to move. Seismic instruments recorded coordinated tremors across the region. 4 distinct points, each one spiraling outward from the river like ripples from a thrown stone. Patterns emerged, shapes formed, symbols ancient civilizations had etched into temple walls and clay tablets. The spiral, the wing, the broken chain. This was not random, this was a summoning. Villages near the river collapsed into chaos. Entire towns emptied overnight. Those who stayed spoke of seeing shadows with wings moving under the thinning veil of night. Livestock were found mutilated, wells boiled, electronics shorted in minutes. One witness described seeing a figure with a crown of fire walking across the dry riverbed, leaving footprints that smouldered for hours. Authorities called it mass hysteria, but the locals knew better. The seals, the very barriers that had held back the ancient forces since the days of Noah, were shattered, and something was walking free. Meanwhile, religious scholars around the world raced to interpret the signs. Some pointed to the book of Revelation, chapter 9, where 4 angels bound at the Euphrates were prophesied to be released at an appointed hour, day, month, and year, to eliminate a third of mankind. Others turned to the book of Enoch, which spoke of watchers who defied God, taught forbidden knowledge, and spawned giants, the Nephilim, before being bound deep in the earth to await judgment. Still others cited Islamic traditions, which warned that when the Euphrates dried, it would reveal a mountain of gold, and men would fight over it until the end. Every tradition, every ancient warning, they all pointed to this river, this moment. And the realization hit hard. The drying of the Euphrates was not just environmental collapse. It was spiritual. It was prophetic. It was apocalyptic. The physical world was cracking open under the pressure of something far older than humanity's short, arrogant memory. Back at the site, the researchers who remained, now working under military escort, detected something even more chilling. Deep ground penetrating radar showed that under the original pit, the earth was hollow. Not a cave, not a chamber, a network. An entire system of tunnels and voids stretching for miles beneath the riverbed. Massive chambers, each one geometrically perfect, lined up like cells in a hive. And at the center, a vast, spiraled abyss. The ancient texts had spoken of an abyss, a bottomless pit from which the destroyer Abaddon would rise at the end of days. Now the radar scan showed it, a hole so deep it registered as an absence on all instruments. No heat, no reflection, nothing. A wound in the body of the world. The same researchers who had once begged for more time to study were now the ones demanding evacuation. But it was already too late. Tremors intensified. At night, the riverbed glowed faintly under the stars, lit by a dull red shimmer that had no source. Strange, gnarled plants grew where the water had receded, plants that blackened and withered at the touch of human hands. Birds migrating over the area dropped dead from the sky. Even the clouds changed, darkening into unnatural shapes, swirling around an invisible axis above the river, casting unnatural shadows at noon. And always the same low hum. Not mechanical, not electrical, alive. A sound that made teeth ache and bones tremble. A call. The final call. Around the world, those attuned to prophecy and ancient knowledge began to prepare. Some gathered in underground churches, praying for deliverance. Others fled to the mountains, believing the cities would soon fall. And a few, a dangerous few, celebrated. They believed the fallen ones would bring power, knowledge, freedom from the laws of God. They were fools, because the thing rising from the Euphrates did not come to rule alongside men. It came to devour them. As the seals shattered and the earth split open, the signs grew impossible to ignore. A solar eclipse blackened the skies over the Middle East. Strange trumpet-like sounds echoed from the heavens, heard by thousands from Turkey to Iraq. A great star, a meteorite or something more, fell into the Indian Ocean, sending shockwaves through the world's oceans. Each event ticking off another box in the ancient scrolls of prophecy. Each event bringing the four closer to the surface. But even then, even with all the signs blazing like fire in the sky, most of the world slept, distracted by their wars, their money, their illusions of control. They did not see the smoke rising from the broken riverbed. They did not hear the grinding of chains giving way. They did not feel the ground trembling underfoot. They had been warned by prophets, by saints, by the Son of God himself. Watch, be ready, for you do not know the hour. Now the hour had come, and beneath the cracked bones of the earth, wings unfurled, eyes opened, and the first of the four took its first full breath in millennia. The sound it made was not a roar. It was a whisper that crossed mountains, oceans, and hearts. They were bound for a reason. The world did not end in fire, not at first. It ended in silence. A silence that came suddenly, without explanation, as if something ancient had inhaled deeply beneath the crust of the earth, holding its breath. Then came the darkness. Not night, not eclipse. A darkness that spread like ink, pouring into the skies over the Euphrates and radiating outward. It swallowed light. It bled through the atmosphere. It did not obey the sun. Cities in Syria, Iraq, and southeastern Turkey reported blackouts. First in the power grid, then in the sky itself. The stars vanished, and with them the veil was torn. Satellites orbiting above the region captured something impossible. A structure, massive, unfolding from the pit beneath the Euphrates, like an enormous set of wings made of shadow and fire. It spanned miles, casting symmetrical lines across the terrain. Ancient geometry, matching sacred symbols found on tablets buried for over 5,000 years. Those lines pulsed, and when they did, the earth responded. Volcanoes ignited in southern Italy, eastern Africa, and the Pacific Ring. Fault lines trembled across California, Turkey, and Japan. The earth was speaking in tremors, crying out in the language of collapse. Something had risen, and it was not alone. The four had returned. And with them came memory, old memories, blood memories of the time, before Eden, before the deluge, when angels walked among men, not in robes of light, but in flesh and hunger. They had taught mankind to war, to summon, to sacrifice. They had twisted creation, leaving behind monstrous echoes, the Nephilim, the Rephaim, the forgotten children of the fall, giants that stalked the early earth, titans that defied heaven, spirits that were never meant to walk in flesh. When God saw what they had done, he sent the flood, not just to cleanse, but to bury, to imprison, but not forever. The book of Revelation was clear. They would be bound until the appointed time, the hour, the day, the month, the year. That time had now come, and the world had been warned, repeatedly. But it had mocked, it had reasoned, it had forgotten. And now, remembering would cost everything. The signs intensified. Blood-red rain fell over parts of Iraq. Witnesses claimed it burned the skin. Animals refused to drink it. In Baghdad, thousands reported a sound vibrating through the ground, something like a trumpet, but deeper, metallic, wounded, as if the earth itself had taken a breath and begun to cry out. Meanwhile, biblical scholars who had spent their lives studying prophecy began to weep, because they realized too late the Euphrates was not just a river, it was a seal, a gate, a prison. And when it broke, so did the barrier between what was above and what had been waiting below. In Jerusalem, watchmen on the Temple Mount reported seeing figures in the clouds, tall, winged, and crowned in fire. Some fell to their knees, others fled. But it was not just the Middle East. The whole world began to shake. A global solar storm disrupted all communications. Planes were grounded, banking systems failed, satellites drifted off course. And in the confusion, something terrible happened. The last seal opened. No one knows exactly what triggered it. Some say it was a surge from the pit. Energy so ancient it shorted every device within 1,000 miles. Others say it was the sound. A frequency so low it could not be heard, only felt, like grief in the bones. But whatever the cause, the result was the same. A final gate collapsed, the abyss was open, and from it rose a figure described by prophets, feared by saints, and named by John the Revelator, Abaddon, the one who destroys. They called him the Destroyer. But that word was too small. He was more than anything people had ever known. He ruled over the deep pit that had no end, a place so dark and so forgotten that even light seemed afraid to enter it. He was not like men, though he could wear their shape. He was not like angels, though he knew things only they once knew. He was not a beast, though his hunger was worse than any wild thing. He was somehow all of them at once, man, angel, creature, wrapped in one being that never slept, never rested, never showed mercy. And he was not alone. Behind him came his army, not 10,000, not 100,000, but 200 million, a number so big it could crush the earth beneath it. And these were not people. They were not animals either. They were something different, something torn apart and remade by darkness, by fire, by time itself. They had no hearts. They moved like smoke drifting across the land. But wherever they passed, death followed close behind. Their breath was poison. Their eyes were flames. They didn't speak, but somehow every man could hear their thoughts. And what they heard was not peace or hope or life. What they heard was the sound of rebellion long ago, and a promise, no, a warning that judgment had finally come. The land cried out as they passed. The ground broke apart like dry bread. Rivers bubbled red and thick. The skies turned black, even at noon. Fires burned with no wind to feed them. Storms rolled over cities without rain, only ash. And people, so many people, shouted at God. They cursed him. They screamed into the air with voices full of fear, pride, and regret. But many never had the chance to finish their words. They fell where they stood, cold, gone. Still, not everyone died. Some dropped to their knees, but not from fear. They bowed their heads, lifted their hands, and worshipped the figure rising slowly out of the river Euphrates. It glowed with a strange light. It looked powerful. It looked like a god. To them, it felt like hope, like the end of pain, like a kind of freedom. But they were wrong. This was not light. This was not peace. And it was not freedom. It was payback. What they were seeing was the cost of forgetting what they should have remembered. The price of pride. The result of ignoring every sign that had been given. The world had been warned again and again. But now the time for warnings was over. All around the globe, everything began to fall apart. Not slowly, but fast, like glass breaking. Sickness came that no medicine could stop. Flames spread without cause. War rose from every corner. Leaders vanished. Cities burned. Mountains shook. And through all this, one thing became clear. These creatures, this being, they had been locked away for a reason. Someone, long ago, had put chains on them. And now that they were free, nothing could stop what was coming. Nothing. Not armies, not prayers, not walls. It was too late. The reckoning had already begun. They were never meant to be loosed. Not now, not ever. And yet here they stood, released not by mistake, but by prophecy. A prophecy given by Jesus himself. There shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity. Men's hearts failing them for fear, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. But what if the Euphrates wasn't just drying, but bleeding? What if Jesus didn't just warn us? He timed it to the very hour? Tell us what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.